I want to create a world in which my son is proud of what we do, in a world and a job that actually does impact people's lives for the better.
Prince William has just shattered the calm of British politics with a televised moment so explosive that Keir Starmer was left staring into the camera, stunned. It wasn't anger, theatrics, or royal authority that caused the freeze. It was the precision of a single statement that cut straight through Labour's carefully guarded narrative. Now, within minutes, the entire country is questioning what this means for the government's future. So, what exactly did the prince say on live TV? Stay tuned as we explore the details. The 11 words that froze Parliament. 3 minutes ago, a moment unfolded in Westminster that no one saw coming. Not MPs, not advisors, and certainly not the Prime Minister himself. It began with just 11 words, spoken calmly by Prince William during a seemingly routine public appearance. 11 words that cracked through the heart of British politics like thunder. When government policy prioritizes speed over heritage, we don't just lose land, we lose ourselves. Those words hit Parliament before William had even stepped away from the microphone. Screens lit up. Phones buzzed across the chamber. Ministers and MPs exchanged looks that ranged from confusion to outright dread. No one expected the future king to say anything remotely political. Yet here he was, delivering a line so precise and so pointed that it instantly shifted the entire balance of power in Westminster. Inside the House of Commons, Prime Minister's Questions was underway. Sir Keir Starmer had just finished defending his controversial national housing initiative when the notification landed on the phones of half the front bench. For a brief second, his own cabinet ministers stopped listening to him and stared down at their screens. The message spread like wildfire. Have you seen what William just said? And then, the moment everyone is now replaying, Starmer froze. He glanced toward the Labour benches, waiting for some cue, some reassuring nod. Nothing came. His hand tightened on the dispatch box. His jaw locked. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to calculate the political cost of responding versus ignoring it. For a few agonizing seconds, he just stared. That silence was louder than any speech he had planned to deliver. Across the aisle, the reaction was instant and brutal. Harriet Harman, a Labour veteran who has survived every leadership crisis since the Neil Kinnock years, put her head in her hands the moment she read the quote. Yvette Cooper, usually composed even in chaos, closed her eyes and quietly mouthed, "Oh my God." No. Cameramen caught it perfectly, the dread of someone who knows the political fallout before it even starts. Even more striking was David Lammy, Starmer's loyal foreign secretary. His reaction wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no visible frustration. Instead, he simply shook his head, slowly, deliberately, like a man watching a train derail in slow motion. While MPs processed the shock, the public was faster. Within 4 minutes, the clip from William's appearance was everywhere. TikTok, X, Instagram news outlets scrambling to push breaking banners. And then the hashtag took off, propelled by millions of furious, stunned, or exhilarated viewers. Hashtag William Visa Starmer, the #1 global trend. In less than 10 minutes, Britain had a political earthquake. And it all started with 11 calm words from a prince who had never spoken so sharply before. But what hidden spark turned those 11 quiet words into a full-blown political detonation? Stay tuned. How a housing plan triggered a constitutional meltdown. To understand why Prince William's 11-word statement detonated like political dynamite, you have to look at the plan that set this entire crisis in motion. Labour's National Housing Initiative. On the surface, it sounded like a bold, almost noble move. Build 300,000 affordable homes across the country to tackle the growing housing crisis. For weeks, Starmer promoted it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reshape Britain for working families. Many voters nodded along. Even critics admitted the idea had potential, but that was before anyone reached page 47. Buried deep in the 200-page policy document, far from the glossy headlines and press photos, was a list of 14 historic sites marked for immediate compulsory purchase. These weren't abandoned warehouses or derelict parking lots. These were heritage-rich locations, including properties with direct ties to the royal family. One entry in particular set off alarms that still haven't stopped ringing. A stretch of Duchy of Cornwall, farmland in Devon, land that has been under royal stewardship for over 700 years. The wording in the document was clinical, cold, almost surgical. Reallocation of surplus Crown-associated land to support national housing expansion. To anyone else, it might have read like bureaucratic jargon. But to people who understand royal land management, it was the equivalent of grabbing a chainsaw and carving through centuries of tradition. When palace advisors first read it, one senior official reportedly physically recoiled. The reaction wasn't theatrical, it was instinctive. The monarchy rarely steps into political matters, and the government rarely pushes directly against Crown estates. There's an unspoken boundary in British governance, a mutual respect built over centuries. Page 47 didn't just cross that line. It bulldozed straight through it with no warning. The Duchy of Cornwall's farmland wasn't merely symbolic. It supports local communities, funds charitable programs, and is tied to a web of economic, cultural, and familial responsibilities. William, as Duke of Cornwall, oversees it not as a political figure, but as a custodian of heritage. So when Labour marked it for seizure without consultation, it wasn't just a policy decision. It was an intrusion into the heart of a centuries-old constitutional relationship. Here's where the scandal deepens. 3 weeks before the plan was announced, Crown Estate representatives met with officials from the Department for Levelling Up. They issued a clear, unequivocal warning. Seizing royal associated land without proper consultation would trigger a constitutional event of significant magnitude. Heritage sites must be managed with joint decision-making frameworks. Alternatives were available: leases, partnerships, or development collaborations. In short, there were options that didn't involve going to war with the monarchy, but Labour ignored all of it. Downing Street advisors believed a bold move against royal privilege would energize the party base and show Starmer as a leader unafraid of entrenched power. They calculated that the public would cheer a government willing to challenge tradition in the name of progress. They miscalculated spectacularly. Instead of framing Labour as revolutionary, page 47 painted the government as reckless, confrontational, and disrespectful. It wasn't long before the public realized that the policy wasn't simply about building new homes. It was about bulldozing royal land for political optics. That decision triggered a chain reaction no one could contain. It provoked William's unprecedented intervention. It forced the monarchy into a defensive posture, and it set the stage for the catastrophic showdown that would soon erupt on live television. A housing plan meant to solve a national crisis had instead created a constitutional meltdown, one that would shake Britain to its core. But how will the future Crown react to this development? Keep watching to find out. William breaks 50 years of royal protocol. At exactly 9:15 a.m., what should have been an unremarkable royal visit turned into the moment Britain realized the future king was no longer willing to remain silent. Prince William was touring a Manchester homeless shelter, greeting volunteers, listening to families, and discussing long-term support for vulnerable communities. Cameras were present, but no one expected anything beyond the usual polished, apolitical remarks that royals have perfected over generations. But then William paused. The room's gentle chatter faded as he stepped forward, his expression calm but unusually firm. He spoke first about the importance of stability, belonging, and community. And then, with no warning, he delivered the line that reverberated across the nation. When government policy prioritizes speed over heritage, we don't just lose land, we lose ourselves. Gasps cut through the room instantly. A volunteer near the front covered her mouth. Another woman began to cry softly, tears slipping down as she mouthed, "He actually said it." Even the shelter staff, accustomed to meeting dignitaries, froze in absolute stillness. It wasn't just the content of William's words, it was who was saying them. A future king. A royal trained from birth to avoid political storms. And here he was, storming straight into one. You could feel the shock ripple outward like a physical force. But William wasn't finished. After a breath that seemed to suspend the entire room, he added a second statement, more devastating than the first. True leadership protects what generations built, not destroys it for short-term gain. No names, no parties, no finger-pointing. Yet, everyone knew exactly who he meant. The Labour government's decision to target historic Duchy of Cornwall land had crossed an invisible line. And William, normally diplomatic to a fault, had decided to respond publicly. You could sense the moment Britain changed. A royal had just delivered a political blow with the precision of a seasoned statesman. And across Westminster, the reverberations were immediate. Within 45 minutes, political leaders began weighing in, and their reactions only magnified the shockwave. Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, was the first to respond. His statement praised William's profound wisdom, calling for an urgent parliamentary debate into the housing plan. His message was clear. The monarchy wasn't alone in its concerns. Then came Nigel Farage, appearing on GB News with what commentators later described as the biggest grin of his career. Farage declared William had spoken for millions of Britons who were tired of watching their heritage sacrificed. His tone wasn't fiery, just deliberate, patriotic, and unexpectedly measured. It resonated instantly. Even Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats and normally deeply cautious about royal commentary, weighed in. He noted that William had raised legitimate concerns about consultation processes, a carefully crafted line that nonetheless signaled support. Within an hour, the hashtags started forming. Hashtag William speaks for us. Hashtag protect our heritage, and the one that would overshadow them all. Hashtag William vs. Starmer. For the first time in half a century, a royal had broken protocol not by accident, but with intent. And his words weren't drifting away into the wind. They were becoming the rallying cry of a country that suddenly found its future, king willing to challenge political power directly. This wasn't just a royal statement. It was the opening salvo in a national confrontation. But what ripple was William setting off that no one in Westminster saw coming? Stay tuned to find out how this royal move could shake British politics to its core. Starmer's career-ending outburst on live TV. If William's remarks shook Westminster, what happened a few hours later during Prime Minister's questions sent the entire political establishment into freefall. The chamber was already tense, buzzing with whispered updates and frantic phone swiping. Everyone knew a confrontation was coming, but nobody expected the Prime Minister to walk straight into his own political grave. The moment arrived when Rishi Sunak stood, wearing a smile so precise and polished it bordered on predatory. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the cameras were rolling, the public was glued to their screens, and Starmer was wobbling under pressure. Sunak's voice carried across the Commons with razor clarity. Does the future king have no right to defend Britain's heritage? It wasn't just a question. It was bait, carefully designed. strategically placed, and impossible to ignore. The Conservative benches erupted in anticipatory murmurs. Labour MPs stiffened. Starmer gripped the dispatch box as if anchoring himself to reality. And then he snapped. Rising to his feet, cheeks flushed and voice shaking with irritation, Starmer delivered the line that will haunt his career forever. The Prince of Wales does not set housing policy in this country. Parliament does. And if he or anyone in that family believes they can veto democratically elected decisions, they are living in a fantasy world that ended centuries ago. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. Conservative MPs exploded into shouts of outrage. The chamber roared so loudly, the microphones crackled. Even the speaker's jaw dropped, his eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. Labour MPs didn't erupt. They froze. Their stillness was more shocking than the noise. Harriet Harman buried her face in her hands. Yvette Cooper mouthed an unmistakable, "Oh my God, no." David Lammy, usually Starmer's fiercest defender, shook his head slowly, as though watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. It was the sort of moment you can't walk back. An irreversible crossing of a line that British politicians treat like sacred ground. And the internet reacted even faster than Parliament. Within minutes, clips flooded TikTok, X, and Instagram. Memes appeared, split-screening William's calm speech with Starmer's furious outburst. Commentators, influencers, and political analysts all used the same phrase. "You can't unring that bell." By the time Starmer returned to his office, the backlash was roaring. Constituents were flooding inboxes. Newspapers were drafting scorching headlines. Pollsters were already reporting shifts in real time. Starmer's team knew they needed damage control, and they needed it fast. 90 minutes after the disastrous exchange, Downing Street released a statement calling his remarks misinterpreted and claiming the Prime Minister held the utmost respect for the Prince of Wales. It framed his comments as a procedural clarification, not an attack. But the video told a different story, crystal clear, widely shared, and impossible to spin. The clarification didn't calm the public. It only confirmed one thing. Starmer knew he had crossed a line no Prime Minister survives, and Britain had just watched it happen live. But what was it about that moment that turned a political misstep into a national firestorm? Keep watching to see how Keir Starmer's action became the spark that ignited Britain's outrage. Britain reacts. Veterans, voters, and the collapse of Labour's base. The fallout from Starmer's outburst didn't unfold gradually. It detonated all at once. Britain, already uneasy about the National Housing Initiative, reacted with a wave of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief that spread far beyond Westminster. And nowhere was the emotional core of that reaction clearer than in the story of James Harrison, a 64-year-old Royal Navy veteran from Portsmouth whose life has become the symbol of Labour's failure. James served 22 years defending Britain. He fought in the Falklands, came home with medals, shrapnel permanently lodged near his spine, and a quiet determination to rebuild his life. Yet today, he lives in a mold-infested council flat, where black streaks creep up the walls like rot spreading through a forgotten ship. His granddaughter sleeps in a room where the air is thick with damp. She now suffers from chronic asthma, something the family insists began only after the mold took hold. For 11 months, James has been begging the local Labour Council for repairs or reassignment. 11 months. No action, no inspection, no help. When asked what he thought of Starmer's plan to seize royal land for new homes, James broke down in tears. "I bled for this country. I can't even get a safe place to live, and they're taking royal land for political points." The interview went viral within hours, shared by veterans groups, pensioner associations, and even teenagers shocked at how someone who served the nation had been abandoned. It became the emotional turning point of the public reaction. and the moment Labour's base began to fracture. Meanwhile, a very different picture was emerging of Labour's own leaders. Reports circulated showing that Starmer and his cabinet ministers lived in luxury taxpayer-funded apartments, including Downing Street flats renovated with £30,000 of public money. Their accommodations include 24-hour security, professional cleaners, and maintenance crews. Comforts far removed from the lived reality of voters like James. The contrast enraged ordinary Britons. It wasn't just bad optics, it felt morally obscene, and the numbers reflected that fury. A YouGov poll released the following morning showed that 68% of Britons thought Starmer's attack on William was inappropriate among voters over 50. A demographic Labour desperately needs. That figure rose to 79%. This wasn't a minor backlash, it was a landslide rejection. Even Labour's once loyal heartlands were shifting. Internal focus groups in Birmingham, Liverpool, and Glasgow delivered what campaign strategists described as catastrophic results. Longtime Labour voters, steelworkers, nurses, pensioners, said William's statement resonated more with them than anything coming from Downing Street. One participant, Colin Davies, a 58-year-old former steelworker, summed it up. "We voted Labour because they stood for us. Now, they disrespect the Crown and lecture us about heritage? That's not the Labour my father supported." The panic spread to union leadership as well. Sharon Graham, General Secretary of Unite the Union and one of Labour's most influential supporters, issued a blistering private warning to party officials. "Our members respect tradition. They respect the monarchy. You've lost Labour's soul. When you lose the unions, you lose the heart of the party." But the clearest sign that this crisis had spilled beyond politics and into culture came from the streets. Within 24 hours, spontaneous demonstrations erupted. 2,000 people in Manchester gathered outside the town hall with signs like "Respect our heritage" and "William spoke truth." Similar crowds formed in Birmingham, Leeds, and Bristol. Political parties organized none of these protests. They were ordinary citizens acting on raw emotion. In a single day, Labour watched its support crumble from veterans to pensioners, to union members, to lifelong voters. The party that once claimed to represent ordinary Britons now stood accused of abandoning them and picking a fight with their future king. The collapse had begun, and Britain was only getting started. But how far could this crisis go? Was Labour about to face consequences far beyond polling numbers? Stay tuned, because what happened next would shock Westminster and the nation alike. The intervention nobody saw coming. Just when Westminster believed the crisis had reached its peak, something happened that no one, politicians, commentators, or even seasoned royal watchers, could have predicted. After decades of cautious neutrality, King Charles stepped directly into the political firestorm, and he did it in a way that left constitutional experts speechless. It unfolded during a private reception at Buckingham Palace, attended by more than 200 Commonwealth ambassadors. Cameras were present, but only to capture the formal pleasantries, shaking hands, polite smiles, and the typical royal choreography. But when Prince William approached his father, everything changed. In full view of the room, King Charles placed both hands on William's shoulders. The gesture alone was shocking, unusually intimate, unmistakably deliberate. Conversations halted, photographers pivoted, diplomats exchanged stunned looks, and then came the moment that detonated across every news channel within the hour. Lip readers analyzing the footage reported the king saying, "You spoke for Britain. Never apologize for defending what matters." Those 10 words shattered 50 years of royal protocol. Kings do not publicly endorse political interventions. Princes do not make politically charged statements. And the monarchy never, ever takes a side in a government dispute, until now. Within hours, Buckingham Palace released an official statement so carefully worded and yet so explosively clear that constitutional scholars began flooding national broadcasts to break down its implications. The statement read, "The Prince of Wales's comments regarding heritage preservation reflect deeply held personal values shared across generations of the royal family. These concerns warrant serious consideration from all parties." In the language of the monarchy, this was nuclear. It was a polite but unmistakable declaration that William was right and the government needed to listen. Professors from Cambridge and Oxford immediately labeled it the most significant royal intervention in government policy since the 1936 abdication crisis. Others called it unprecedented, historic, and constitutionally transformative. And Britain reacted instantly, especially the financial markets. Within hours of the PMQ confrontation and the palace's statement, the pound fell sharply, dropping over 1% against the dollar. The FTSE 100 tumbled 89 points, its largest single-day fall in months. Property development companies, supposed beneficiaries of the housing plan, saw their share prices collapse. Investors cited constitutional instability and government hostility to Crown assets as reasons for pulling money from the UK. This wasn't just political drama, it was an economic shock. Meanwhile, inside Labour headquarters, the crisis deepened into a full-blown mutiny. Senior MPs began quietly discussing leadership alternatives. Names like Angela Rayner, Yvette Cooper, and Wes Streeting circulated in hushed tones. Even Starmer's allies stopped defending him on television. His cabinet members avoided interviews entirely. The famous Labour WhatsApp groups burst into activity. Save Our Party, filled with MPs pleading for urgent damage control. Post-Starmer planning, openly discussing leadership timelines, replacement strategies, and how to stabilize the party if Starmer is forced out. Over 40 members of Parliament joined these discussions within 24 hours. Some demanded that Starmer apologize to the palace. Others insisted he resign before the party completely collapses. One anonymous MP told the BBC, "He's finished. It's just a matter of timing." Another simply said, "We cannot win a war against the Crown." The Labour Party wasn't just panicking, it was disintegrating. Between a king-breaking tradition, markets destabilizing, and MPs preparing for rebellion, Britain found itself facing the kind of constitutional crisis studied for decades, and it was about to get even worse. But could Starmer's decisions have crossed a line that no political maneuver could recover from? Keep watching, because what unfolded next would rewrite the rules of Westminster entirely. The leaks, the Sue Gray bombshell, and Reform UK's rising tide. Just when it seemed the crisis couldn't plunge any deeper, Britain was rocked by a set of revelations so explosive they reframed the entire scandal. Everything, from William's intervention to Starmer's meltdown, suddenly took on a darker, more calculated tone. Because now, the public wasn't just dealing with a disastrous policy, they were dealing with proof that the government had been warned, repeatedly, and chose to provoke this constitutional earthquake anyway. The first blow landed via a bombshell telegraph leak, a stack of internal documents showing that 3 weeks before the National Housing Initiative was unveiled, Labour ministers were explicitly warned by Crown estate officials that seizing Duchy of Cornwall land would trigger a constitutional crisis. Not could, would. The leak included meeting minutes, notes from civil servants, and most damning of all, an email from a senior Downing Street advisor to Housing Secretary Michael Gove stating, "The political benefit of showing we're not afraid to challenge royal privilege outweighs the diplomatic concerns. Prime Minister wants to proceed regardless." It was the kind of sentence that destroys governments. It didn't just show recklessness, it showed intent. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Starmer hadn't stumbled into a fight with the monarchy. He had engineered it, deliberately, in the hope of appearing bold, decisive, and unflinching. Instead, He'd set fire to the political landscape and underestimated the nation's loyalty to both tradition and heritage. Then came the second shockwave, the Sue Gray email. Known for her meticulous political instincts and for playing a key role in bringing down Boris Johnson, Sue Gray is the quiet, calculating architect of Starmer's operations. But leaked emails revealed she had urged extreme caution, writing, "Picking a fight with Kensington Palace serves no policy objective and creates massive political risk. We should pursue collaborative solutions." Her warning wasn't vague. It wasn't diplomatic. It was a flashing red alarm, and Starmer ignored her. Even more concerning, Sue Gray had been mysteriously absent from Downing Street throughout the entire crisis. She skipped emergency cabinet meetings. She wasn't present during strategy sessions. Multiple sources whispered that she was considering resignation. Her silence spoke louder than any public statement. If the woman who dismantled a prime minister's career won't stand by Starmer, what message does that send? Into this vacuum stepped a figure no one expected to gain from a constitutional crisis, Nigel Farage. Farage seized the moment with masterful timing. While Labour imploded and the Conservatives tried to steady the ship, Farage rebranded himself as the voice of ordinary Britons, defending heritage, veterans, and the monarchy against political opportunism. In Stoke-on-Trent, he delivered a speech seen as one of the strongest of his career. Prince William said what millions of you already feel: our traditions matter, our heritage matters, and the people of this country will not be sidelined. Clips of the speech hit 3 million views in 12 hours, and Reform UK's membership surged by 60,000 in 1 week. Polling became even more surprising, with Reform UK overtaking Labour in 3 constituencies. Among voters aged 55 to 64, Reform achieved 31%. Historic numbers, even women over 60, once skeptical of Farage, shifted towards him. A 3-way deadlock has emerged between Conservatives, Labour, and Reform, something Britain hasn't seen since the 1920s, and the crisis was far from over. The next 72 hours would decide the nation's future, with Prince William attending the state opening of Parliament. Sitting opposite Starmer in a moment sure to make headlines worldwide, Labour's NEC would hold an emergency meeting, where Starmer's leadership would face its first major challenge. 3 leading newspapers were preparing new exposés based on leaked documents, each supposedly more damaging than the last. Britain wasn't simply watching a government struggle. It was watching a government unravel, and the final chapter had yet to be written. So, what do you think? Could William's 11 words really topple a government? Or is Starmer already writing his own ending? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.